Thank you for tuning in to No Sudden Moves Radio. And remember, stay on the proven path so you don't risk falling behind. Here at Business Legends, we don't overthink it. Look around and see what everyone else is doing. If it's working for them, it will work for you.
Welcome to Wait It Out, where we believe there's no reason to act now. The opportunity will still be there when the timing is better.
The age of disruption isn't coming, it's here. And the boldest move isn't following the crowd, it's following your why. I'm Patrick Ledden, and you're listening to Disruption Lab. Hi, folks, it's Patrick Ledden, and I want to welcome you to this episode of Disruption Lab Podcast, the podcast where we sit down with guests to talk about the curveballs in life, the changes, the twists and the turns, how we can take those twists and turns and turn them into something exceptional so we can live our own good lives. To do so, I invite a broad range of people to have conversation with me about what they learned, all with one thought in mind, to help you to live a better life. I got a special guest for you today. My guest today is James Patterson. Yes, that James Patterson, the world's best-selling author. He's my co-author of the book, Disrupt Everything and Win, which became an instant New York Times bestseller. It's based upon research that I did at Vanderbilt University as James and I partnered on this idea of the power of positive disruption. We're going to talk a little bit about James's career, where he started, how he got into advertising, where it went from there, which is exceptionally interesting, and then how he pivoted into writing and became the world's best-selling author who literally changed the face of publishing. Trust me, you're going to want to sit back, relax, and take some notes as my co-author and friend, James Patterson, and I talk about the power of positive disruption.
Dr. Patrick Ledden, this is a pleasure. This is a really cool one. I'm really excited about this. You know, the thing of it is, and we've talked about this from the beginning, and we'll probably get into it again, but the whole notion here is are people living a good life, or would they like to live a better life, or would they like to continue leading a good life if they're leading a good life? And our book, Disrupt Everything and Win, it's unusual in that it's both a business book and a self-help book. And once you tell them, you know, why, if you don't mind, why it's a particularly good business book, why it should be the next business book that they read.
You know, it's so true, Jim. It does straddle both business and self-help. And I guess it's a little bit more like, hey, we have a whole life. We have our personal life, we have our professional life, we have a life. And the reason I think it's a really good business book in so many ways, and I can't say it better than what happened the other day. I was on a phone call with a CEO of a company. Get this, it's a company with 10,000 employees. And the CEO jumps on a line and he holds the book up to me and he says, I want every one of my leaders, every one of my employees to do exactly what this book talks about. Now that's a great call, right? But what he's saying at the end of the day is he said, just like we talked about in life, but the same is true at work. There's lots of disruptions, lots of stuff that stops you in your tracks. And you can either become anxious or fearful or try to ignore it or whatever it might be. But what if you looked at it a little bit differently and said, what if this is fertile ground for something new and something different? And this book teaches a process to do it. So you can apply this in life, you can apply this in work. And this CEO saw exactly why. So I was actually with them this week, stood in front of their top 150 leaders and explained to them how they can help create positive disruptors in their business world, which is what they need.
People think that they can hide and run away from this stuff. You cannot. You cannot run away from artificial intelligence. I recently saw a film that was done, and I thought it was like $1 million production, and it was done in like 2 days for $15,000. You can't hide. You can just say, "Oh, we don't want it to happen." Well, it's going to happen. You can't do anything about it. And all of these things, every morning we wake up with a new disruption, and we'd like to hide from some of them. Can't hide. You can't hide. And that's why the book, I think, is so useful and maybe ahead of its time, but it's so important that people get into it. Now, we mentioned also on the self-help part, which you know, we when we were putting the book together, the self-help part of it became, I guess, partly because you were out talking about the book and people kept talking about the most important thing is what it does for our families. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think that was kind of fun how, in retrospect, how he did it. In the moment, I was like, I don't know, this is kind of crazy because we were working on the outline and working on the research. At the same time, I was just going out and talking to audiences about it and getting their feedback. And you and I were talking, Jim, one time, and you said, what's resonating? What's sticking with people? And I said, well, I'm telling them this story as we go through it, just about a disruption in my own personal life with my parents. Very quickly, my parents were getting older. And I noticed that as I was living my life in a different city and they were living their life in their city, the weekly conversations between the two of us became very surface level,
Hmm.
between the three of us
Hmm.
became very surface level kind of obligation. I'd call them once a week just to check in, and they'd tell me the weather and the traffic and what's going on in their world, and I'd do the same thing. And at one point I was just like, it could get better. And it kind of, I didn't have the word for it, but I was disrupted. I was like, I could be a better son. So I started doing things a little differently, like sending postcards or calling with questions prepared
Yeah.
to ask them, because they raised five kids and we had two at the time. And I thought, maybe they have some good ideas. And guess what? They learned a lot apparently over the years. So fast forward a couple years, my mom passes away. And I remember sitting there talking to my wife, and I said, I'm just so glad I decided to disrupt the relationship. And she said, you're still a son. And across the room was my dad. And I went over to my dad, and my dad's kind of the no guy. And I said, like, no, I don't need this, or I'm fine. My car's fine, whatever it might be. I said, hey, Dad, I travel a lot for work. You want to come with me? And he was like, where are you going? He didn't say no. He said, where are you going? And then he went on
Uh-huh.
business trips with me. And I
Uh-huh.
just saw him so much differently. And so I was telling that story as a moment where you decide, like, I'm thinking about how I am as a son, and it kind of disrupted me. It made me
Hmm.
think I could do a better job. So I chose to turn it into a disruption. And in the course of doing that, I changed the dynamics with my parents, which was such a huge thing, especially with my mom passing and just all
Yeah.
that. And the audience was they resonated with so strongly.
Well, Patrick, the other thing is I think Landman stole your story because in the latest Landman, it's exactly what happens. And this guy asks his father, "You want to come with me?" And he's expecting the father to go, "No way." And the father goes, "All right, let's go."
All right, so I need my royalties. I need to get a hold of Landman and tell him I need my royalties. So you were talking about business wise though. So in the last couple of weeks, I've been out speaking a lot about the book. I've been in like
Now
six
we
or
have a
seven
thing with
cities.
Franklin Covey too, right?
Right.
Of course we
Right.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. So Franklin Covey asked me to go out there. They have a course called Innovate for Impact, which is based upon the ideas and concepts in the book, which is a lot of fun. So they had me out in Dallas, Austin, Phoenix, and then Atlanta yesterday. And I walked in the room in Atlanta, and it was a full room. It was like call the fire marshal, because there's a lot of people like wanting
Uh-huh.
to hear
Uh-huh.
about this
Uh-huh.
topic. Disruption's just so alive in people's world. And I walked in, and there was this one lady sitting there, and she said, "I came here because yesterday or last week you were in Arizona, and one of my colleagues was in Arizona, and she told me I needed to come see this." And then the lady at the next table told me the exact same thing about Arizona. And then I walk in the back of the room and I said to this guy, I go, "You look familiar." He said, "Yeah, I heard you talk about this last week in Austin. I came up to Atlanta to hear about it again."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
it's scratching an itch where
Yeah.
people are like, I'm
Yeah, yeah,
feeling
yeah, yeah.
very disrupted.
Now they're getting it. Well, you have to get it. You just have to. Why don't you talk a little bit how, Patrick was a professor at Vanderbilt where I went to grad school. And I got invited down to his class, business class. And so what happens there, Patrick?
Yeah, so you get invited to my class. It was a class called Leading Business Through Times of Crisis. And we had a number of guest speakers. And Jim, you were so kind to be one of those guest speakers. And I guess you could say you came in the room and disrupted me, because you came in the room and the first thing you said to the students, or asked the students, you said, "Are you living a good life? Or do you feel like you're on one treadmill getting on another treadmill?" And you can tell the story better than I can, Jim, but you called that presentation that day The Power of
The
Disruption.
power of disruption. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The positive power of disruption, which is there are two pieces to this thing, and one is the power of positive disruption in terms of how you can positively affect your business life, your corporation, your small business, your place inside wherever you're working, and then in terms of how it's important in terms of your family and your family members and the future of your family. And the other side of it is getting out of the way of negative disruptions. How do you deal with? You have a story about artificial intelligence and a guy who was talking to you at one of the conferences you were at, right?
Yeah, so this guy at this conference was telling me about artificial intelligence, and he said, "I'm really concerned about it because," I said, "Tell me more." And he said, "Well, I'm a writer for a living at work. I write copy
I
and
can
write a lot of our
identify with this.
documentation." Yeah, you understand this. And he said, I mean, think about if AI was around when you were working initially at J. Walter Thompson. That'd be an interesting thing to have. And he said, the other day, he's telling me the other day, my CEO gave a speech that was like 80% written by ChatGPT. I'm going to be out of a job pretty soon. And I
Yeah.
said, well, I said, you might be. I mean, that could very well happen. Well, I'm not sure. We're not futurists, right, Jim? We don't know that. We're behavioralists, but we
We
can
are
tell you,
futurists.
we are futurists. Okay, we are. And I said, I don't know exactly what's going to happen with AI, but it's going to change a lot of things. But you kind of have a choice right now. You either go work on your resume and you say, okay, I'm not going to work out here. Or maybe you think about this. Is there a way I can be more valuable at my company with AI existing? And he decided to go down that path. And then in the book, we talk about these different roles because we studied people around the world who deal with disruption in positive ways. And we found that they take on one of 5 roles. And I just said to him, hey, which role should you take on? And in
Hmm.
his case, he said, I need to be a trailblazer. I need to
Now,
learn more about
at
AI than anybody
Vanderbilt,
else.
there's a lot of good research and in terms of putting this book together. And you started a program a project at Vanderbilt, right?
Yeah. After you left the class that day, I said, okay, there's a question I want to answer, which is basically, how did Jim do what Jim does? When Jim gets hit with a disruption, good or bad at face value, whatever it might be, he's looking to say, like, how does this help me live a better life, have a bigger impact, find good fortune for myself and others. And I wanted to study how people did that. So I started
Yeah.
a project at Vanderbilt that was sponsored by our chancellor, and it was called the Disruption Project. And for the next 2.5 years or so, we interviewed in long form interview 350 people. So hour and a half, 2 hours talking to them, coding the results of that, trying to figure out what are the patterns that we can find. And we started to figure out that people who are positive disruptors do certain things. They don't
Hmm.
just react, they discern.
Let me
They don't
stop at
just,
let me stop
yeah,
at Vanderbilt for a second because that's
yeah,
really
sure.
interesting because that is a university that is really and it has to do with the chancellor and positive disruption and they are doing it and his vision is really that Vanderbilt become the or one of the universities of the future in terms of how they do everything. And they now originally in Nashville they now have a campus in New York City. They're building a campus in San Francisco. They're building a campus in West Palm Beach. And it's all about positive disruption. When he went there, he
Yeah.
went there from the University of Chicago, and he looked around, and they've always had terrible sports teams. At least they're not all terrible, but the basketball and football teams have not been good, mostly. Football in particular, not good at all. And he said, this is really important for our donors and because they're embarrassed by the sports, and that is not a good thing. And he immediately put a big investment in, which he's gotten back quadruple now in terms of donors. And their football team has been ranked the last, which is unheard of. I
Yeah.
would never wear a Vanderbilt hat because it was too, and now I should have worn it today, my Vanderbilt hat.
Now,
And
now, now
but the
we have a
football
book. Now
team
we
is
have a
great, and they got two
now
great
we have a
basketball
book that's
teams.
black and yellow. Now you and I
Yeah,
have a book that's black and yellow, if nothing
that's
else,
right.
right?
That's right. That's right. But there's a great example of the power of positive disruption. Especially, I almost thought it was impossible to turn around those sports teams. Really impossible. And we watched the women last night. They won again. They're ranked, I
Yep.
think, sixth in the country. Incredibly good. But so there's an example of what can happen, people that are listening, in terms of turning around situations in ways that really are beneficial to you.
Yeah, and that's an institution that's 150 years old,
Yeah.
and like you said, had
And
been in
they've
one
had
location for
150
150
years of
years.
bad football teams.
Exactly. They
Almost.
could bowl and they could play baseball. Those were their two things, and they decided they're gonna do it differently. And I think that's great. I actually heard a gentleman say the other day, I can get up today and be mediocre, or I can get up today and be excellent. And it's really a choice of what I want to do. There's no guarantees in life, but what attitude do I want to get up with today? And that's what the university is doing.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, I mean, this it's not a political book at all. We've been on Fox and we've been on CNN, and Fox gets it and CNN gets it. In fact, I was talking with Caitlin Collins about it on her CNN show, and you talk about disruption. It's a White House correspondent, so she's there early in the morning, gets out of there at 6:30 from her White House job. She then goes over and does her show at 9. I mean, talk about a disruption to your life.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. And Fox disrupted a long time ago, and that's the reason why they're kind of on top. They just figured out what had to happen, and they did it. And some of these other stations they're starting to disrupt now in terms of changing. MSNBC is now whatever they are. MS Now, I think it
MS
is.
Now. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Well, the question becomes sometimes, do you wait too long
Yeah,
I mean, not that you can't come back, but there's a point where if you keep burying your head in the sand or acting like things aren't changing around you, or what kind of got you there will get you,
yeah.
what got you here will get you there. Eventually, you might be on the right track, but you're not moving fast enough.
And getting back to the self-help part of it, it's just
Uh-huh.
so important to everybody in your household, or your partners, your spouses, whatever it is, and your kids. Big for your
Oh,
kids, and
absolutely.
also big for your kids to begin to start thinking this way. And the key is positive. We probably should have put positive in the title. We should
Yeah.
have disrupted ourselves, but because that's what this is all about. It's not being troublemakers. It's about moving things forward in good ways.
Yeah, in good ways. And it's funny, I've noticed, I was talking to an audience the other day and I just happened to say to them, and they were like, there was an extra like light bulb that went on. I said to them, you notice we didn't call the book Change Everything.
Yeah,
We called it Disrupt Everything.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Sometimes the most disruptive thing you can do in a moment is say no to change when
Hmm.
everybody else is chasing it, right? But it's basically, instead of saying like the world's out to get me or all these other things are happening and I can't do much about them, it's all of a sudden saying,
Yeah.
wait a minute, maybe you can. And I like how you say, Jim, it's like you don't have to change everything or disrupt everything tomorrow. Just take a step. Just begin
Yeah.
moving in that
Well,
direction.
people are going to make their own decisions. This isn't one of those. It fits everybody. You can make small changes. You can make them one at a time, slowly, slowly, and that's very attractive to some people. And for other people, it's like, let's do big things. I've had two careers. I was in advertising, although I've been clean for over 30 years.
I love
But
that line. Yeah.
that was all about disruption. It was all about
Yeah.
changing things. The way I got into J. Walter Thompson, they were the number one ad agency in the country. I had no marketing classes, no advertising classes. You had to put together a portfolio of spec ads. And so I brought them the portfolio. And then a week later, I brought them another portfolio. And a week later, I brought them another portfolio. I totally disrupted the process. And they went, you're a guy. We want to hire you. And they weren't hiring people. They hired me anyway. And everything in advertising, it was about disruption. When I took over the New York office, they weren't good. And we couldn't, it was hard to hire people because they knew that office wasn't good. And I did an ad, Write If You Want Work. And it was 8 questions. Here are the ingredients on beans, vinegar, water, whatever. Make it sound delicious. And I ultimately hired almost 50 writers over the course of 3 or 4 years just off of that simple ad. So I disrupted the process of how do you hire people. And then we'll get into the disruptions in terms of my publishing career. But getting back to the book and what's in it, Patrick, because you're so eloquent when you talk about it. So talk
Yeah, I'm
about
so
it.
eloquent, right? All right, yeah. Now you disrupted me. Jim just said I was eloquent. Yeah, yes. It's very much like what you just mentioned there, though. Like you can look at a situation and say, okay, I'm looking to get this job. How do I disrupt the process? We want people to think that through, discern what to do. And in your case, it was said, I can do it by bringing a couple more. I'll show them how creative I am. I'll keep showing up. Hopefully, they'll hire me before I run out of ideas. But I'm going to keep coming back with ideas, and
Exactly
that can be
right.
really disruptive. It causes you to stand out in that moment and it can be really beneficial. So what we found is that in the research is there is process that people follow. And they don't just something happens, they get a doctor's report or a great project opportunity or a call from a friend that kind of stops them in their track or they lose their job or whatever it might be. The first thing they do is they don't just react. They don't just go, okay, I'm Pavlov's dog, ring the bell and I'm going to salivate. What they do is they go, okay, let me step back. Where am I trying to go in life? What's my good life look like? What's my
Yeah.
good team look like? And what role should I take on? Should I lean into the change? Should I do it myself? Should I bring other people with me and create a movement? We help them think through those roles. And I know on the business side, that was really appealing to people too, as we talk about it, because a lot of times when we talk about how people deal with situations, especially in business books, they'll talk a lot about personalities. They'll say, well, this is your personality and you're this type of person or that type of person. You and I aren't really labeling anybody other than saying you can be a positive disruptor.
Yeah.
We're saying take the role on that's the right role in the moment, which means you
Yeah.
need to be mature enough to make a decision and figure out like what do you feel like you want to do? What is the situation asking you to do? And then
One
lean
of
into your
the
strengths.
one of the things I learned in business, and it really propelled my career and in publishing as well, is just the power of stories. And pretty much most of the people that I know who've made it really made they understand the power. Every company has a story, and a lot of times that story needs to change. We used to do Thompson still does the advertising, I believe, for Ford. But when I was there, Ford's story was they weren't doing well, and Ford, F-O-R-D, it was found on road dead or fix or repair daily. That's a bad story. And so we helped them. They helped themselves by building suddenly a couple of really good cars like Taurus. But we helped them to turn that story, to change that story. And that's another important thing for people to begin to change their stories a little bit, you know. And the book is full of stories because stories help us to learn. They help us to understand and to learn. So, I mean, so what are some of your favorite stories? I know you love the car wash. What are some of the stories that you
Yeah,
love in there?
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good stories there, and as you were talking about that, I just kept thinking about them because stories are really powerful. And I just like to think about the idea of like, are you writing your story every day? Are you? I guess we would used to say when you wrote everything by hand, you know, are you crossing your T's and dotting your I's? But are you doing those keystrokes? I guess we'll say these days. But every day you're writing a story. There's a story in the book you mentioned, the car wash one. It was a great story. I remember I came down, you and I met that day, and then I went over and saw the gentleman at the car wash named Tom Dieri. And Tom Dieri's story in a nutshell is when he's 22 years old. He's graduating from college and he's got his eyes set on, I'm going to go to Manhattan and work in some, you know, high flying job, consulting, finance, that type of thing. And then at the same time, he's thinking about his 20-year-old brother, Andrew, who's on the autism spectrum. And Tom's like, well, what's Andrew going to do in his life? And Tom spent some time with Andrew's school and talking to Tom and talked to his parents and basically said, I'm not going to pursue this. He wanted to do something with his brother. That was kind of his disruptive moment. And then he started a car wash. And now they have 3 car washes and they have
Mm-hmm.
100 employees. 90 of them are on the autism spectrum. And I went down and talked to him for the interview. I remember talking to him for about an hour and a half. And I was walking out of the interview. And you know, Jim, when you're interviewing somebody or talking to somebody, sometimes there's a lot of value in that last question that kind of comes to mind. And do you ask it or not ask it? And
Mm-hmm.
I was walking out of the room and I just turned back and I saw him sitting there. And folks, imagine this, the room he's in, it's in the car wash. It's kind of their office space slash hangout area slash storage facility. Like, a lot of stuff in this room. And he's sitting there in a red polo shirt. And I turn back and I look at him. And now Tom's 35 at this point. And I look back at Tom and I said, hey, Tom, what would your 22-year-old self say if your 35-year-old self was sitting here and the 22-year-old self walked in and saw him in a red polo shirt running a car wash? And he said, he would say, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I just,
Mm-hmm.
it's a beautiful line because what he's saying is like, I realized what my fire inside
Yep.
was, where I was
Yep.
trying
Yep.
to
Yep.
go. And I knew that being my brother's keeper was a big part of that. And all
Yeah.
of a sudden now he's
Yep.
helping people see that
Mm-hmm.
workforce so much differently.
Yep, yep, yep. I mentioned the Franklin and Covey presentations, which put any company in or not any company, most companies will come or will come in with Franklin Covey and do presentations for them, which I think are very valuable. I can't imagine any company or any industry that won't benefit from thinking about disruption the way we help them do. And to some extent, both with Franklin Covey and this book, you kind of get us as coaches and advisors for free, which is useful because we've been through a lot. I mean, Patrick, both teaching in business and then doing all this research and just my career turning around or changing publishing and changing advertising. But I think it's really useful that we can do that and help people to some extent. And some people need a mission statement. We can help you. What's your mission? To turn that around? How do you move forward with your life, with your career, things like that? You know.
Yeah, it's so true, Jim. When I'm out talking to those audiences, and I've just had like I said, 6 or 7 in the last few days, I'll ask them, I'll say, hey, just really quickly, I won't even tell them what disruption means. I don't even define it or anything like that. I just say, hey, introduce yourself to your teammate at the table and just on a scale of 1 to 10, how much disruption you deal with, calm or chaos? And they
Uh-huh.
talk about it. And then I stand in the middle of the room and I say, you know, 150, 200 people, whatever's in the room. And I'll say, if a 1 is over there and a 10 is over there, if you want me to represent the room, which way should I walk? And immediately they're like that way toward the 10. And then I'll be like, where's my 7s? Where's my 8s? Where's my 9s? Where's my 12s and 14s? And they feel it.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
love how you say, Jim, you know, we would talk to people and I love how you say this. You're like, how you doing? And people say things like, I'm hanging in there.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
getting
Yeah. Yeah.
by.
Right.
That's
Right.
not good enough.
Oh, it's constant. Well, you know, hanging in is the thing I hear over and over and over and over and again. Yeah, and we can do better. We can do better, and we need to do better. We need to do better to survive, honestly. It's going to be an interesting. I mean, this year, it's going to be interesting if we get through it. You know, the other thing about people listening and watching is sometimes people think that they've done something when they listen to a lecture or a presentation. You really probably didn't do anything, folks. What matters is actually doing it and dealing with positive disruption in your life. As I said, I cannot imagine You look at we talked about before about CNN. That business is just changing drastically. The film business, I deal with that. I got various movies. We have an Alice Cross, which is actually coming out on Amazon next week again. And that business is just so disruptive every week. The television business disrupting incredibly. No matter, I just can't imagine any corporation, any small company that won't benefit from dealing with disruption in positive ways, or individuals. I mean, somebody might
Yeah,
not be ready
absolutely.
for it, and that's why I say you can do this step at a time, Atomic Habits. I mean, I think one of the things that makes that attractive is you can take a small step and another small step, and that's smart and that's useful. And the difference, once again, between change and disruption is a lot more intense. Change is a little slower and easier, but we're in the age of disruption now. We really are.
Yeah, I actually saw a data point the other day from PricewaterhouseCoopers. They were talking about global CEOs and how those global CEOs, 45% of them that they polled felt like their business may not be viable in the next 10 years
Uh huh. Uh huh.
because of
Uh huh.
poor execution and poor leadership. And there's an expression out there that says no organization has the inherent right to exist. I remember when I was a kid, Jim, that I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and like the jewelry store on the corner was always the jewelry store on the corner, and the pharmacy was always the pharmacy. And then you fast forward 20 some years, and I have kids, and they're driving by and go, "Oh, there's a new jewelry store. I wonder how long that'll be there." And now it's
Hmm.
just even completely different from that. So we
Yeah.
have to we have to figure out how to handle disruptions in our life because they're going to come. We're all disrupted. We have to figure out how to handle them in positive ways. And like you
Yeah.
said, deal with the negative ones too,
Yeah.
so that in turn we can actually kind of redefine what it looks like to be great.
Yeah. And business. I mean, going back to Vanderbilt briefly, in talking to the chancellor, they're doing a business school, and it's not going to be like any other business school. I mean, for the most part, when you talked about people that are in business now, most of them feel that an MBA is not really useful anymore. And it's all going to change in business. We're not going to have all these managers, these rows and rows of managers. So if you're going to be in business, but we're going to have a lot of people who are doers, and you'll be able to make a lot of money just doing what you're supposed to be doing and doing it well, not managing a bunch of people, because that's going to change. That's going to change radically. It already is. It already is. I
Yeah.
mean, you see these very progressive companies now firing tons of people because they get these massive ranks of managers, people doing the same thing. So it's not really useful. We don't need 10 people doing a job that one person should do. Okay, so then what happens to the rest of us? Well, we need to disrupt. We need to move positive. We need to save ourselves. We need to get better at what we do. And we can. We can.
Yeah. And it's really interesting though, as people start to embrace this, they start to realize I can write my story. And
Yeah.
that's what we want
Yeah.
them to do. Yeah. Share their story, write their story, contribute their story. We have 35 or so stories out of 350 in the book, but there's millions of them out there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. Everybody has a story, and sometimes people feel that they can't write their stories, and this is another place where thinking about what we're talking about can be useful to them. Yes, you can. Yes, you really can. You can do it. You can change. Positive disruptions are just such a key to your future. What else?
When
What
we
am
were
I
writing this,
missing?
well, Jim, when we were writing, I was gonna say when we were writing the book, there was, I don't know how many times we disrupted the outline, we disrupted which stories
Yeah.
went in, we disrupted all that. And then right toward the very end, I mean, we were getting close to the end. You came to me with this great idea and you're like, hey, we need to put in some small moves that people could take, some small steps they can do.
Yeah.
So we ended up putting in the book 27 positive disruptor moves. And these are little steps you could take. They're not
Yeah.
huge. You don't have to do all of them by any stretch, but you could just do one or two of them and say, like, I'm gonna, if I'm in a room in a meeting and the air just feels a little weird and we don't seem like we're really talking about what we should be talking about, I'm just gonna say it and put it on the table. Things like that. That could be little steps,
Yeah.
like saying the scary yes or owning it, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden you realize, hey, I did it. Everything didn't blow up. It got better. I'm gonna do it
Yeah.
again
In
and see where it
most
goes from there.
cases, things that scare people shouldn't scare them. And if you're in an environment, a business where it is scary to do positive things, if you can get out of it, get out of it.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's not a great environment. And sometimes you can't, but I mean, that's usually a sign of not the best management in the world.
Well, as I've been talking to leaders, and I've had a chance to do a few executive sessions where I'm working with just the executive leadership of a company.
Yeah.
And even if they want their people to be more innovative and want their people to be more positive disruptors, if you will, they've got to do some things to kind of create the environment.
Yeah.
So they have to be clear on like what risk tolerance is organizationally, who can make what decision.
Yeah.
Because if I don't know what decision I can make, I'm not going to probably make any. It might be feel like I'm career limiting. I need to make it really clear like where we stand and where we're going, so people understand those type of things really
Yeah,
clearly. And when
yeah.
people
There
are
are a lot of
doing
things.
the
Yeah,
type of
there's
things
so
you're talking
many
about,
things you can do.
yeah,
And one of the things I do with young people when now in the publishing business, I just throw them in the pool, man. They're young and watch them.
yeah,
With our Sue is my wife's a big swimmer, all American and whatever. But she threw Jack in the pool when he was 4 months. He was fine. We watched him, but same thing. You got
sure,
young people in the business. Throw them in the pool, man. Let them get
yeah.
wet. Let them go under. Pull them out. Make sure they'll be okay. But get them going. Don't waste a couple of years just sort of like moping around with them. Yeah, they're young and they're smart, and get them
And
going.
and they'll figure things out. I remember
And
I
throw the
spent
old
my
people in the pool too.
yeah,
The older
exactly.
people
I
because
spent
they
my
got it. Sometimes you wear them down, but they still got it. Throw them in the pool. They'll
yeah,
be fine.
exactly.
Oh my God,
That's
he's
true.
swimming like a seal. Yeah.
Yeah, I spent my 20s, as you know, Jim, in the Army. I did the Army Ranger thing, and I remember the expression used to be, if you want a whole dog, give two soldiers shovels and get out of their way. Yeah, or
Uh-huh.
tell them what you want done and leave the room, type of thing. And that's so true. I mean, if people feel like they can own it and they can make it happen, they'll oftentimes figure it out. Now, it's a great book. It's been a great project. I really appreciate working with you and becoming friendly with you. And we're going to change a lot of lives as we continue to go forward with this, because people pick it up every day and send me notes about how it's impacting them.
And once again, don't just listen, do something. Listening is, I mean, it's a thank you for listening, but now next step, do something positive.
Have a bias toward action. Absolutely.
I think this is great, Patrick.
Loved it. Well, folks, that's all I have for today's episode. Big thanks to my colleague and friend, James Patterson, for joining me today to talk about our book, Disrupt Everything and Win, and specifically about the power of positive disruption. If you're looking to take the curveballs in your life and turn them into something good, no, wait, something great, I encourage you to go to my website, patrickledden.com. You can learn more about the book. You can learn about a number of resources, and you can even share your story to encourage others to do the same. That's all I have for today. Thanks so much for joining me. My name's Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.